Hello, pilots, and welcome to episode 11 of the Ramjet Anvil Show. I'm Zelry Nelson Jr., your host and the developer of All Hail Spider God, Screw You Bear Dad, and Mazorca Ghost in Italy. And today I am very happy to be, as always, be joined by my fantastic colleagues working on Volo Airsport proper, Martin.
Hey, that's me.
And Frank.
Hi.
And today we're doing something a little bit different. I noticed that in the game trailers for Volo Airsport, one of the big things you would highlight is when you would say, hey, there's improved or increased flight assists. And from what I've come to understand, flight assists aren't simply a matter of making flight easier or harder, right?
No, they're not. You know jet fighters, right? They go very fast. They're very nimble. The way they do that is they're actually really unstable to fly, and if they wouldn't have a computer on board to sort of help you fly them, they would just sort of go, whoa, crash. That's how they are that nimble. They can go anywhere all the time, and if they weren't controlled by a computer, they would. Same here. There's a little bit of a control system in the background that helps you move the little character around.
So,
And it's necessary because you can't control all the limbs. You're not physically that person. So you have a controller, so you cannot stabilize everything manually.
it's not a statement against your skill as a player, it's more you need this point of abstraction so that you can more immersively interact with the world rather than dealing with the character or a model that is completely unruly, perhaps like real life, but since that isn't real life, you aren't actually there, it simply feels frustrating or unfair.
Yeah. But we should go in and show these things. We should hands-on find out how this works.
Yes.
Yes.
We're gonna be deconstructing the player a little bit, the pilot.
Especially for you, Nelson, this will be a fun little thing to just try and suggest, well, can we turn this off? Can we make this bigger? What happens then? So where should we start? What's our first target?
My first question would be, when the player starts the game, when they spawn in from the highest point, what is the Volo person doing before you click on them? Like, are they just hanging in midair?
Well, technically, they don't exist yet. Or they exist in some sort of limbo. Look.
We actually have 4 pilots ready to go and fly.
And
why 4? Because we were working on multiplayer. But anyway, they're just sitting there, invisible.
Beneath the world itself?
Yeah.
yeah, at the absolute zero. And you can see the rest of the world is here. And they are joined by a whole bunch of other stuff. Like there's the little, we call them ball buddies that move around. And there's all the rings for the courses that aren't used are probably also here. They're all here.
In the abyss.
Yeah, let's see what happens. This is probably not a good idea, but oh, look, there we go. I turned them on. And, well, that's what happens.
It's just a hell mass.
Let's not do that.
What happens if you deactivate the wind, then?
Well, that depends on what you mean by deactivating the wind. Do you mean actually removing all the air? Or, because that's difficult.
What happens if you just simply, for example, vertical force? If there's no vertical force being exerted here that lifts the player along, what happens then?
Well, then we'll start falling down real fast, essentially, because there's nothing to prevent us from doing so. Okay, so let's find the big wing surfaces here. This should turn them off. And you can see immediately we just started going down. And
You still have forward momentum.
I want my gamepad control back. There we go. Yeah, I'm kind of tracking right now, but I don't have a lot of control over it. Actually, this is an interesting point because people have asked about this. Can we do just normal skydiving jumps without a wingsuit? Can we do tracking jumps? Well, not quite, but it's also, the simulation model is not that far from it as well.
Yeah, you can already see that technically, even though physically it's not there yet. that it's all possible. You can just remove the wings. It's kind of cool to see that.
So yeah,
It already works.
it's mostly about just making sure that the game works and controls well for all these different scenarios. That's the big thing. But in principle, it works and it's possible. As I'm picking up speed, you can see that my glide ratio is now, it went up to almost 2 for a second while I flared out. So yeah, as long as I go up to top speed, this is actually not that far from how it works in real life.
So if you want to not
ratio-
die, you gotta go fast.
Yes,
As fast as possible.
it's true with the wingsuit, especially true without.
Yeah. Maybe we should quickly explain what glide ratio is, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So that's your glide ratio is the ratio between the amount of distance that you go forward versus the amount that you go down. And so for every meter that you go down, if you go 2 meters forward, that means you're kind of going at an angle like this, your glide ratio would be 2. And if you're going at a 45-degree angle, that means you're going 1 meter down for you 1 meter forward, and your glide ratio would be 1. You should just put this in the game.
One thing I noticed
Yeah.
immediately is that once it seems like the physical forces that act on the wings also serve to hold the pilot's limbs at bay, and once those are gone, you immediately have a lot more maneuverability.
Yes, you do. Oh, yeah, I forgot. You can just more immediately do things like this.
The main lesson I've learned from this is that the life of a Volo pilot is basically an endless series of horrors. What about the flight assist? Because when I looked into the Volo Airsport menu, the player can switch off some assists themselves. What's the difference between those toggles and turning off that system entirely, as going back to earlier when you spoke about the abstraction and computer aid needed to be able to control something effectively?
There's a couple of ones that you can configure, like the input speed scaling. And what that does is the faster you go, sort of the more lift, radically the more lift and drag you will generate. As you go to, say, towards 200 kilometers an hour, you only have to do tiny, tiny motions. Like, basically just what I'm doing right now. Barely anything. Just shifting my weight around a little bit. You already get a lot of motion out of that, just because of the forces involved. So if I would leave everything at just full magnitude, you'd probably spin out of control really quickly. We can just turn it all the way off, and that should give us something that's a lot harder to control. Yeah, you can see that I'm trying to be subtle, but where I could
that's
first
you trying to be subtle.
Yeah. It's not possible.
But it's really hard to get this to, and I have to be so careful now in order to not. No, look, I can no longer align this guy to just straight flight. It doesn't work. Try it again. Whoa! Look at that.
That was
Whoa.
something amazing.
Ow. Right.
So if we attach the wings back to our pilot, can we see what that input speed scaling looks with the actual wingsuit model?
And yeah, it messes the physics up. Okay. Can I respawn? Yes.
Is this the laser battle mode of Volo Airsport?
Yeah. So that's kind of a thing that you can expect to happen if you take some things that are happening at really high speed, and wow, this is.
So you're making really subtle, trying to make really subtle movements, but it's too unsubtle already.
That brings me up to an interesting thing. Sort of turn off all the stabilization. So if I start rolling now, and I'm not using the controller now anymore, you really easily get into these spiraling modes of just loss of control. And then you go, well, wait, I want to not spin, so I'm going to spin the other way to cancel out my spin. But then you get into some sort of other spin, and
You're
oh
upside
god,
down, and
Yeah. So
wow.
this is what a computer is good at doing.
the computer is really good at detecting just very small amounts of unwanted roll. Like, we can just say, are you pushing to the left? No? Then you probably don't want to roll. And so if there's any inadvertent roll happening because the wind changed or anything, then the character knows, I gotta steer towards the right a little bit to cancel it out.
The name of that course, by the way, that we just passed, Terminal Ferocity, that's a 10 out of 10 right there. Stabilization really, again, it is that little point of abstraction, that little point of unreality that allows you to feel more like you're actually controlling the character, because that's what you would be able to do that yourself if you were actually in the situation, but since you aren't, you're controlling it through a gamepad or a keyboard and mouse, then you need something sort of to give you that same sense of presence.
Look at that. It's, the way I like to think about it is like reflexes. Throughout your life, as you learn to crawl and then walk, you train your reflexes, and those are parts of your behavior as you move around the world that you eventually stop thinking about. It just happens. If you had to consciously think about every step that you take and find your balance for every body part, using everything, coordinating the whole thing like you're commanding an orchestra of muscles, like, that's ridiculous, right? That's not how we do things. And so, especially with a video game as well, there's actually games that do this. Like, I'm a huge fan of a little, I think it's free indie game called Toribash, in which you take a physical ragdoll character and you tell each and every individual muscle, like, do this for the next half second, and you can choreograph fight sequences and parkour moves. It's fantastic. But that gives you the ability to pause and try things again and again and again to get exactly the right motion for the elbow. And it takes ages to do. You can't really play out a fight in real time that way. There's just too much to think about.
What happens if we remove the left leg? So if you lose,
Nelson.
if you that sounds okay. The way I said that sounds way worse than what I actually intended. I just said that so deadpan. Just like, what happens if we remove?
We'll
the
just
left
put it
leg?
in the abyss. We'll just put it in the abyss. And we'll add it later.
Put it back in the abyss. I'll have to think a little bit about how I'm gonna remove this in a way that Wingman will still live. I removed one too many.
No, that's...
So Frank, I'm not sure if you handled this part, but really, when you look at the differences between the assists you can turn on and off on your end as the direct game editing and developing environment, and that players can with the game inputs and speed scaling, what's the difference between those two sorts of assists?
Well, I'd like to think of it as assists that we think are useful to the player. Like Martijn said before, actually, there are some things that the computer is really good at doing, like stabilizing, that would be very hard to do on a controller. So that are the type of assists that you don't really want to turn off as a player, I think. It's all with regards to what the device is that you're actually using to play the game.
What happens if you turn off the arms and just leave the legs going normally?
Oh wow!
You're like a torpedo.
You can really see what the legs are actually doing, and they're doing a lot. They're doing so much work.
Okay, this might sound like a weird question. Can you? I'm seeing a lot of physical forces are acting on the pelvis of this character. What happens if you remove its butt?
Well, I think we're gonna see body parts fly off in different directions if I do that.
Yeah.
Look, no butt.
It's Blu-ray, man.
Wow.
You can see how important your butt is. It's
I want control over my arms. Does it? No, it doesn't want me to respawn. That's when it breaks, but now you know.
So Frank, basically what you're saying is that the butt is the most important part of the Volo Airsport flight model.
Yeah, sure.
It's the most important aspect of my body. At the very least, apparently it ties the whole thing together.
What else can we do?
We could do a wind tunnel thing, where we explain some stuff about the wind and how we did some of the early tweaking for the physics model.
That would be fun.
So, okay. Here's how I used to do it. Take his torso, and I pin it in place. I go, find him. So now when I unpause the game, we're frozen in space.
This is actually more horrifying than some of the other things that we did, because it's like the Volo pilot is a butterfly that's been pinned into one of those display cases.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is a little bit. No freedom of movement, but now we can see...
If you close your left and right arms at the same time, can you give yourself a high five behind your back?
Let me try and... No, I can't get him to go over, but theoretically it's possible, of course.
Okay.
You can see the character's very nimble. Like, he can almost touch his head with his feet. Now what we can do is go into the wind system. And, well, let's add a little bit of constant wind. This is just constant upwind and constant downwind, and ooh. And again, we can still move the character around, but now you can see there's a lot less power to it because the force of the wind is just so much. And this is how I used to just really quickly test the extremes of motion. This will be fun to build into a proper editor where we can pin arbitrary parts of the character and then see, well, how does it behave in this circumstance? How about this circumstance? And get a feel for how these things work.
This wind system, it's that's actually pretty cool. It makes me wonder, is there going to be a chance later on to possibly have a little mode or a thing you can toggle in the menu, just like you can, I think you can toggle the time of day right now?
Yes!
You can toggle how fast the wind is or what direction it's moving, just so you can test like extreme conditions on the regular Volo person with all of the innovations and cool things you've made to make the flight model work. See how that performs in an extreme situation instead of simply in a test.
Yeah, that would be an interesting thing to do, but I would also like to see more of the extremes reflected in the world itself. Like there's a natural location for like an extreme wind, and you can go there and then experience extreme upward wind, and you can use the parachute to get a lot higher.
But you're looking for diegetic ways, I think is the term for it, like in-world ways to express these more natural concepts, like an extreme wind or etc. Make the world feel more rich.
And make it visual as well. But that's all stuff for the future, of course, because that's also very hard to do. But yeah, that would be really, really cool if we could do something like that.
Do these trees have collision? Like, can you collide into a tree?
You mean you've never tried?
You have never flown into...
I was afraid to build the Volo pilot, which, considering my willingness to take off their limbs, might seem impossible. But yes, I didn't want to hurt them too badly.
So, let's find one.
I'm gonna find out now, right? Maybe.
And we can do it in slow motion.
Slow motion?
I think.
Okay.
Okay, we're on course. I think.
Yes.
Ow. So that's why the head never gets affected by the injury, because it is a non-physical point. I was just thinking they were...
Yeah, it's just the torso takes hits.
But he is wearing a
Yeah,
helmet.
I was thinking a
right?
really strong
So
helmet.
he never gets hurt.
That's actually a really good point at which to just leave him exactly in that pose. This is a really good
Yes.
point at which to tell you that you can mess with some of your own Volo settings in Volo Air Sport, which is currently available on Steam, itch.io right now. We're actually having a beta for the next update, which will have the live parachute deployment you saw earlier in this strange video. And you can opt into that through instructions that I think will appear on the screen right now, right?
Yes, certainly.
Yeah.
All right.
So, see you next
Thank
week.
you so much for watching. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and tell your friends if you enjoyed what you saw. And take care. Until next time, pilots.